All right, and folks, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, 100.5 FM and streaming at www.coopradio.org. You can find us there and you can see the programs that we have, all community-centered and oriented, brought to you by volunteers. If you feel like hanging out with us, you can sign up and join with the cooperative, and you can volunteer your time, your expertise and skills, as well as throw us a little bit of money. Some pocket change would be great to keep community-centered programming, independent alternative radio happening in the city since the past 40 years or so. This program is called Bulan Awaz and the Rational, and today we will be speaking with Hill Times columnist Erica Eiffel on a recent article titled "Police Brutality is a Feature of Democratic Canada, Not a Bug." And before that, we will be speaking with Samandara, a research assistant at the Journalism Research Center, who has written a fantastic piece titled "The Power to Narrate," and it is all about how Canadian journalists who report on Palestinian perspectives are dismissed, monitored, and censored. So stay tuned for that. We will be right back with that. Okay, and still here on Coast Salish territories, broadcasting at 100.5 FM and streaming at www.coopradio.org. And joining us on the line is Samandara, who is a research assistant at the Journalism Research Center, founder and producer of Met Radio Show, digital editor and social media coordinator for The Otter. Thank you so much for taking this time out and joining us.
Hi, Omer. Thank you for having me on.
Before we get to your article titled "The Power to Narrate: How Canadian Journalists Who Report Palestinian Perspectives Are Dismissed, Monitored, and Censored," which appeared in the Review of Journalism in April, can you please just give us a little bit of context around the Journalism Research Center itself and your role there?
So the Journalism Research Center is separate from the Review of Journalism. The Review of Journalism is a publication for second-year master's students and last-year undergraduate students, and we work on criticizing Canadian media, but also reviewing Canadian media.
Awesome. Okay, so in terms of this particular article, please share with us what inspired you to research and write this article.
Sure. So the purpose of this article was to essentially recognize the anti-Palestinian bias in Canadian news media. As the Review of Journalism, like Newsroom, we were aware of this beforehand as well, because in 2022, Raha Farawi had published for the Review as well, and she had written about how for the article was called CBC's Palestine Exception. And she had pretty much written about how when it came to pitching about stories about Palestine and the region, there was a censorship occurring, but also there was an anti-Palestinian bias. And so this year, with the ongoing genocide in Gaza, we also knew that we had to, recognize the anti-Palestinian bias which continues in Canadian news media. And we had started with the CBC as well.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. For anybody who is watching the CBC and thinks that the CBC is neutral in terms of its reporting on Palestine, really, I think need to have their ears checked, because you're quite right. There has been an ongoing bias. Your article was very detailed, and thank you very much for taking the time and writing that. Can you share with listeners some of the arguments or threads that you found, and then perhaps we can discuss them in detail?
Sure, yeah. So when it came to journalists who do bring the Palestinian perspective into newsrooms, they were being censored and dismissed. And this was the case for a former CBC producer who had asked to remain anonymous in the story, and also Palestinian journalist Zara Al-Akhras at Global News. And there was clearly like a chill in recognizing anti-Palestinian biases and practices in the newsrooms. And even still, I'd say there are people who want change in newsrooms, but there's few journalists who feel that they can outwardly speak about the censorship they or Palestinian perspectives are facing.
Salman, can you share some of those ways that censorship happens in the newsroom?
Yeah, so I used the first example with the former CBC producer in this ongoing genocide, and when talking about the CBC, it's important to remember that it is largely a publicly funded organization, which means that it is a public service, and it has the mandate to reflect Canadian perspectives. However, when it comes to reporting on Palestine, there's double standards at play. Again, this has been happening for years. And so, for example, there was Palestinian allies and Palestinians are more likely to be pre-taped, which means that later the tapings could be edited to censor words like genocide or apartheid. There was also a case where a Palestinian Canadian's relative was killed by Israeli forces at a Greek Orthodox church in Gaza, and the former producer was told to fact-check the death. And this is clearly a double standard when it comes to when reporting on Palestinian deaths, because she had said that in her 5+ years of working at the CBC, she had never been asked to fact-check a death before. The former producer also discussed issues with senior executives having a lack of knowledge about Palestine and the region, even though they were more likely to have more experience or were more likely to have covered past Israeli aggressions. She explained how one of her colleagues had to explain what the Nakba was to a senior staff member. And so, when we're reminded that the CBC's mandate is to reflect Canadian perspectives, through this interview and also with the former CBC producer, we know that mandate is not being met.
Thank you so much for sharing those kinds of things in detail. Would you go more into the double standards that you find in the Palestinian case? You mentioned a couple, but are there others, or other ways that censorship happens?
Yeah. So in Zara Al-Akhras' case at Global News, there was a very strong censorship of her social media over the years. So for journalists to post about Palestine or for human rights for Palestinians is seen as being controversial. So she had been called out for a number of her social media posts by Chorus Entertainment, which is the parent group of Global News. But again, with the CBC's policy in November, which they also had sent out an email to all of their employees, was that CBC that in its on matters of public interest or controversy or politics, journalists were not able to. They weren't told not to share anything that the CBC themselves would not put on air or online. So that is a clear line of censorship of journalists and their personal social medias as well. And so
wait a minute. So sorry. Just to clarify. So what this is saying is that if you're working for the CBC and you want to post something, you first need to think whether or not the CBC may run such a thing before you post. It's on you to check. Is that okay? Yeah.
So this was they had sent out this email in November of 2023. So and it's clear that social medias are usually targeted by pro-Israeli groups as well. But when newsrooms themselves are doing it, it's helping pro-Israeli groups.
And you also talk about dishonest reporting. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I used this in like brackets,
parentheses,
honest reporting, as a subheading. But the actual group is called Honest Reporting Canada. So HRC is a group with over 60,000 members. They essentially claim to promote fair and accurate reporting about the state of Israel in Canadian media. The members essentially monitor media from newsrooms, and they put pressure for more pro-Israeli language in reporting. Mm-hmm. On their site, they have published, they call it media corrections, and these date back probably over 2 decades. And they're known to target the largest newsrooms in Canada to the smallest, and this includes campus-led or university newsrooms as well. And they have a track record of, like I said before, campaigning against individual journalists, and especially those who sign open letters for fairer coverage on Palestine, or journalists' personal social media accounts.
Mm. Yeah. So this particular group has had activities for over quite some time in Canada. It's not a recent phenomena.
No, it's not recent. This HRC is just the Canada version, but there's also other countries which have honest reporting. Like in
the UK or in the United States, you mean?
Yes, yeah, in the UK, and yes. So they very much are a group which is throughout the world. And last July, HRC's executive director said he wanted to create a digital army for Israel. And so in the piece, I kind of referenced this and how these pressure groups sort of they do have leverage in Canadian newsrooms, which is worrisome.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and HRC's executive director had also said that because there are editorial cutbacks in newsrooms, especially in recent years, they're able to provide an editorial oversight, which essentially means that HRC does pose a risk because it's creating a direct relationship between newsrooms, and it is influencing Canadian reporting. Are there other such groups that monitor the media in this way that exist in Canada that you know of? Not that I know of, but I'm sure that there are more pro-Israeli complaints filed because the producer that I had talked to, the former CBC producer, was saying that there's definitely a pressure that is felt in the newsroom to adhere to the influence that these groups have. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Were there other sources of influence that you found in researching this beyond this particular group?
I did not. I didn't. I chose to focus on HRC.
Fair enough.
Because they had also targeted the Review of Journalism in 2022 after Rahaf had posted her CBC's Palestine exception piece.
Yes.
So we were quite aware of them. And we were also, so we had to take that into account as well.
So it's quite fair then to say that they are really a central factor in influencing journalism content vis-a-vis Palestine.
Yes.
In Canada at least, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and it's I think they also target a lot of university newsrooms, which is which people don't often think about university newsrooms, but I think that's it's the starting point for a lot of the people that are going to go into the journalism industry. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that we do also have them in mind.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's very deep. Yeah, as you're saying, they're very broad and very deep.
Yeah.
What other things came up for you that you found interesting as you were researching this particular group and its methodologies?
I think it's like I had said about that there are newsroom cutbacks, and this was proven. This was written in Davide Mastracci's the Maple piece where he had talked about HRC. And so I think once again, like, it's just the connection between newsrooms and these groups. And I think that people, when they do see anti-Palestinian bias or coverage, I think that they too should be reporting it or calling these newsrooms out, because there is so much lobbying from pro-Israeli groups happening and influence happening in these newsrooms.
Canadians would often consider outlets like the CBC to be doing the best that it can, for it to be as fair as possible, for it to be better than what's available in some other countries, like in the United States, or, I'm just saying this is rhetoric that I've heard over the years. People who are seemingly liberal and so on, get their mainstay of news from the CBC. So in researching this, what would you consider or say to the CBC or the boards of directors of the CBC or whoever in terms of their coverage on Palestine? And I just want to backtrack and go back to the context that the CBC has been at this for quite some time. As you point out, this is not new. And even, I think the word Palestine itself or occupied territories or so on, and I'm not quite sure, but remember there was it went into a judicial review or there was something going on where these words could not be used when it was with reporting to Palestine. So given the state that we're at now, if you had a chance to say something to them vis-a-vis this, what would you say to them? I mean, at this point, I guess it's not even advice, but what would you say to them?
I think I would recognize that there are, if I was talking to the CBC, it would be that there are people, journalists in the CBC, who do want this meaningful change, and that they're doing their employees or journalists injustice by not working on it. And because it is inherent, it's very much ingrained, the anti-Palestinian bias is ingrained in these newsrooms. I think it very much requires doing a lot of work in reporting the Palestinian perspective, and for people that are are living under Israeli occupation to be, heard and to be listened to. It's quite simple, I think. We don't, people don't want to be edited out for criticizing the state of Israel. And that is quite it's not a difficult concept to grasp. It's quite just talking about human rights and what life is like under occupation for Palestinians, under Israeli occupation, and the injustices that are occurring.
It is still unfathomable to me, Saman, that some of the producers at the CBC would feel so intimidated and pressured, and yet, be reporting, I guess, differently with other conflicts or in other regions, and still be able to feel that they are doing some kind of justice to the public. It's just really unfathomable that an organization would have that much influence and pressure. And I can understand that it's decades old and it's been at it for a long time, but can you help us square the circle again for listeners who just may not be familiar with how these things go about, manifesting?
Yeah, so I think when we consider production of news stories as well, there's a number of layers, and a lot of people sometimes eyes are on that work. And so when it comes to not having clear guidelines on whether or you're having anti-Palestinian guidelines, for example, not being able to say the word Palestine, or not reporting on what's happening as apartheid or genocide, then that's where the issues rise. That's where journalists also will not take that they will also know that what's happening isn't right. And I've also spoken to a number of journalists who do work at the big, legacy media organizations, and they say that, what they're publishing isn't like what I believe in. And so there's journalists out there that don't want to be complicit in this. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to like the former CBC producer quitting in protest, it's like a very strong stance to take, especially when there's few opportunities for journalists in an industry which is shrinking. So yeah.
So I urge listeners again to read the article. It's titled "The Power to Narrate: How Canadian Journalists Who Report on Palestinian Perspectives Are Dismissed, Monitored and Censored," and it appeared in the Review of Journalism in April 2024. We're speaking with the author Saman Dara. Saman, you also talked about a couple of personalities at the CBC that listeners may be familiar with, Pachin Matar and Janela Massa. Can you talk to us about how they intersected with your issue, with the story, rather? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So Pachin is a journalist and producer who has spent over a decade working in Canadian media. She often speaks about objectivity, racism, and power in Canadian media. For this article, Pachin addressed a number of harmful newsroom practices, one of which included, the propping up more extreme voices in reporting. And so in connection to that, I used the example of CBC interviewing an Israeli forces spokesperson who echoed quite genocidal and racist statements of Israeli Prime Minister. And Pachin also addressed, the second thing that Pachin addressed in the article is CBC's attempts to censor their own journalists on social media. And I had talked about this a little bit before, but in what Pachin had said on her own social media was that that because CBC was trying to censor journalists' social medias, it was quite a significant tactic because Gaza-based social media and journalists were reporting on social media, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and these are, she had also said that these are often stories that don't make it into legacy or traditional newsrooms.
Correct.
So, Pachin and then the other person that also comes to mind is Janela Massa. So she also brings 13 years of experience working at newsrooms in Canada. She described how whenever it came to reporting on the state of Israel, the narrative was always skewed, of course, favoring Israel. And Janela also talked about language in reporting. There was an instance where she was told she couldn't use the word Palestine because it didn't exist. So that's, of course, anti-Palestinian bias. She also recognized how calling for human rights for Palestinians, and in that case, a lot of other groups should not be controversial. And yeah, so both Pachin and Janela have definitely been proven to be voices of reason and calling for change in Canadian media, and calling for change in the coverage of Palestine.
Mm-hmm. And they've both left the CBC, so listeners can also follow them and see, because obviously now they're a little bit freer to talk about what they want. So what would you want readers to take away from your article? I know it's an unfair question, but if there was a few things that you would want readers to take away, what would you want?
Yeah, I think reading the article can definitely be distressful. But I think I would like the reader to know that there are people in the journalism industry who want to see a lasting change in how Palestine is reported on. I think it's important to know that practices and policies in newsrooms can change, and it begins with the news audience flagging what they're seeing is anti-Palestinian bias, and newsrooms also need to report on the realities of Israeli occupation and aggressions experienced by Palestinians. And so,
Awesome. Okay, well, before we let you go, can you tell us about Met Radio and where listeners can find that?
So Met Radio is also separate, but the Review of Journalism, if you go on their website, they do have a podcast. And so we do talk to Percent and a number of other voices on Palestine. And you can listen to their episode on Palestine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Salman, thank you so much for taking this time out and for discussing your article with us. Congratulations for writing it. And I know that a lot of people have taken a lot out of your article, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye. So we are still here and broadcasting on Coast Salish territories, and we will be coming right back and to speak with Erica Iffel about police brutality being foundational in Canadian democracy and not just a bug. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
They said they'd done all they could. Us to believe they were trying to be good, and now they want us to move on. Get over it, what's done is done, but the bodies don't lie. Bodies don't lie. Bodies don't lie. And there's those who don't mind, saying once again we must be cruel to be kind. I love to hear them explain the practical necessities of other people's pain, but the bodies don't lie. Bodies don't lie. Bodies don't lie. Put the bodies in the ground, but some of us can see them and they're walking all around. Guess what I wanna say the most? I don't believe in people